Hello everybody and welcome to the Intel Retro Console Spotlight here at EPIC.LAN. I'm joined by the wonderful Mark from Intel. Hello Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I can't wait to hear loads more about these retro consoles. So yeah, let's get straight into it. I'm going to ask you a few general questions to start off with. So I'll start by asking you, what inspired you to start collecting these retro consoles?
I think it's because, what inspired me to collect these retro consoles, let me give you a little bit of background, right? So I got my first console when I think I was about 5 years old, and it was a Nintendo NES, right? So the kind of the original Nintendo. And I loved that thing when I was growing up, right? And then from there, I just, had loads of various video game consoles as I was growing up. I graduated to the Sega Mega Drive and then to, the Sony PlayStation. I diverted away for a little bit and got into PC gaming, which worked out well for my job here at Intel. But over the years, I've never lost that interest in that kind of what I consider to be the kind of golden age of video games, and certainly being able to work at GameSpot as well as part of my career, let me, continue to cherish those video games over time. And as I say, I'm just kind of revisiting my childhood, just capturing the stuff that I couldn't afford to have when I was a kid and buying it now. Why not?
I love that. I'm like a big games person as well. I did game dev in uni and things like that as well. So for me, I kind of grew up with two older brothers, so it was always like games consoles everywhere. Every time, everything was just games. Now, do you have a favorite memory from gaming specifically?
Ooh, it's difficult, but I would say, I think my favorite, and probably the one that always sticks in my mind, and I can't remember how old I was when this happened, but it was when I got my Sega Mega Drive. And I remember it because my mum and dad, bless them, would throw me this big birthday party. And I had loads of friends over, and then they gave me the present. I unwrapped it, and I remember it was a Mega Drive, and it came with a copy of Sonic the Hedgehog, and we all just freaked out. Me and my friends, oh my God, it's amazing. And then there was about, I also remember this, about half an hour where, bless my dad, desperately tried to figure out how to plug it into the TV. Couldn't quite get it to work initially, but he got there in the end. And it's just stuck with me, booting that up for the first time and playing Sonic the Hedgehog and just being like, oh my God, this is amazing. It looks just like a cartoon. It's so incredible. Love that.
So do you have any recommendations or kind of good resources for people that want to kind of learn about retro gaming and retro hardware?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when I was getting back into this, I still had some of the consoles I had when I was a kid, right? But obviously technology has changed a lot, since we were growing up, when we all had big CRT TVs and things like that. And I think one of the things that people always run into with retro consoles is, how do you plug one into a modern TV? Because either you do it and it looks terrible, or it doesn't even have the inputs, right? So I found a lot of great resources online. I certainly recommend the site Retro RGB. I think that's a fantastic resource. But even more so is My Life in Gaming, which is a fantastic YouTube channel, really well produced. And they have what they call these kind of 101 videos, sort of getting started with various consoles. So they have one for the Dreamcast, they'll have one for the PlayStation, the original Nintendo NES, and just a guide on the best games, how to set it up, how to connect it to your TV and things like that. It's a fantastic resource that everyone should check out.
Do you have any recommendations for some good starting consoles for people that are kind of wanting to edge their way into learning about retro hardware?
Yeah, it depends on what you're after, right? So I would say the ones that you grew up with as a kid will always be the ones that you remember the most fondly, right? So that's a great starting point. However, as I say, there are complications with getting those things hooked up to a TV. So one of the best things you can do is if you really just want to try and dip your toe in the water of retro gaming, is check out one of the many mini consoles that are out there. I know there was a kind of phase where everyone was releasing a mini console. Those are based on emulation, but they do work really well. They cost £50 or so, and you can just plug it straight into a TV with HDMI and it works, right? And it will give you a lot of that experience without having to kind of go down the rabbit hole of seeking out original hardware and original games. The sort of upgrade from that, I'd also recommend, in fact, I have one here. So these are the analog consoles. These are like modern recreations of 16-bit hardware. So this is a modern recreation of a Super Nintendo. And this has HDMI on it. It plays original games via cartridge, and it's really cool because it uses FPGAs, Field Programmable Gate Array. I've got that correct, but it's actually an Intel one that's in here. Not a plug, but it is pretty cool that it's in here. And basically, it's like a one-to-one recreation of the original console, but with amazing high-quality visuals that look amazing on a HD TV. So that's another route you could go as well.
Do you have a personal favorite console?
There are a few that I have, and I've brought out a few here actually to kind of show you, right? So there are some neat ones, like I think the GameCube. I think everyone remembers the GameCube it's cool, right? It's dinky, it's fun. This is actually a Japanese exclusive colorway. I think it was called like Orange Spice. Just a cool console, loads of really, really cool games on it. And it's pretty easy actually to hook up to a modern TV. There's a device you can buy called a GCHD, which plugs into the back here, the digital output, and it outputs 480p video to a TV. Looks great. Pretty cool to have. They are expensive, but worth it. The Sega Saturn, also another personal favorite of mine, mostly because no one liked this. When it came out. It was a follow-up to the Mega Drive, and it wasn't particularly popular. It came out around the same time as the PlayStation, and we obviously all know the PlayStation was a huge success. But this was extremely popular in Japan. And if you go to Japan and you ever go shopping for retro games, you will find Saturn games everywhere, like absolutely everywhere. And it has some of the best 2D games that you can find out there. It's super, super cool. And I just think, everyone should pick up a Saturn just to play like fighting games and kind of like 2D shooters and things like that. So those are two of my favorites, and I'll mention one more just because I've got it here. Which not everyone will have heard of. So this is the Neo Geo CD. If you're not familiar with the Neo Geo, it was basically an arcade in a box. It was the same hardware as an arcade cabinet, but you could use at home. It was identical. So the games weren't ports, they were just the same games that you would play in an arcade. It was ludicrously expensive. I think the original Neo Geo, when it came out, was like $650, and that was in the 90s. So you can imagine it cost a fortune. And the games themselves also came on these cartridges that cost around $300, like $300 per game. Super expensive. So this was like their version of a mainstream version of it that used CDs instead, which made the games much, much cheaper because the CDs were cheaper. Unfortunately, it has a one-speed CD-ROM drive, which means it takes about 60 seconds to load a game. And when you're playing like a fighting game, in between every round, you have to wait 60 seconds. Not great, but it's cool hardware, and the games look fantastic on it. So yeah, if you're into 2D games, this is a cool one to pick up.
Does the waiting time not frustrate you?
It does, but it's part of the charm of these old consoles. I mean, the Neo Geo CD is definitely the worst for that. I think some of the others are okay, but you can do things like, so with the GameCube, for example, there's a thing you can buy, and I forget what it's called, but it essentially allows you to replace the CD drive inside with an SD card reader. So you can store all your games on an SD card, obviously ones that you've legally purchased, and then just load them up off that, and it is a lot quicker to load. So there are things you can do to get around it.
I'm going to ask you now, do you have a favourite retro game?
Ooh, favourite retro game. That's a difficult one to pick because, when you have a lot of consoles like this, right, there's a lot of stuff that you sort of end up playing. If I had to pick a favourite series, right, it would be Super Mario Brothers. I know it's a really obvious choice, right, but every game in that series is fantastic, all the way through from the original to the modern games like Super Mario Odyssey on the Switch is a fantastic game. They're all infinitely playable. Anyone can play them as well, right? It's one of those games that just works for every age range, and every skill level. They're just fantastic. So yeah, real soft spot for Mario.
Very good choice, I have to say. That is an exceptional choice. I definitely agree.
It's me, Mario!
I feel like this is just one massive throwback for you now. This entire segment is just going to be a huge throwback. Which console is your most prized possession and why?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. There are, again, I'll walk you through like maybe two. I will pick up this specific PlayStation 2. This is cool for a number of reasons. One, it's a limited edition anniversary PlayStation 2 that only came out in Japan in this particular colorway. And I picked it up when I was on holiday over there. It's also cool because it was essentially completely broken when I got it. So I fixed this by basically butchering two other PlayStation 2s, which you can buy for nothing these days, and then fixing up the parts in it to make it like new. So that was a fun project. And the other one, which is very cool, oh my God, it's so heavy though, is this. So this is a Sony MSX. Now this is like getting into like super old territory, right? But the MSX was a computer platform that only came out in Japan, released around 1985. Actually, not just Japan, but a lot of the Asian countries. And it was partly developed with Microsoft, if you can believe that. It ran a version of Microsoft Basic. And it was intended to be this home computer platform, but it also had cartridge slots for games, right? It's kind of crazy because the games by today's standards look pretty ropey. It's not like even the original Nintendo games still look really, really good on this. They look a bit ropey, but it's pretty rare. And this is actually an MSX2 Plus, which makes it even rarer. Again, I picked this up while I was in Japan and brought it back with me in my suitcase. My suitcase weighed a ton when I came back from that trip. But it's just a cool piece of hardware to have, a complete pain in the bum to plug in and to run anything on. But if you can get it working, it's pretty cool and a real trip down kind of memory lane for old school computing.
So out of all the consoles that you've shown me, which one of them has been the most expensive retro console?
Ooh, that's interesting. The MSX that I just showed, so the most expensive console, the MSX I just showed you was pretty expensive. I think that was around £350 when I was in Japan. Now, that's cheap in the sense of, relatively speaking, if you tried to buy that in this country, you would pay a lot more. But if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to travel and go to the source, you can get things a bit cheaper. That's still quite expensive. The Neo Geo is another one that's quite expensive. I don't have it here, but I have the original Neo Geo with the cartridges. That I bought into that quite late, and I ended up paying around £500 for that console. Well, it came with some games and stuff, but that was pretty expensive. So not all retro gaming is necessarily cheap, particularly these days as it's super popular, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about how much GameCube games used to cost in the past. You know, you pay like £50 for a game. There are some GameCube games now that run into the hundreds and hundreds of pounds. There's a game on Sega Saturn that famously costs thousands, which is Panzer Dragoon Saga, because they only printed about 12,000 copies of it. So if you have a copy at home, it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah, so what you're saying is if you have a copy at home, do not sell it down at CEX, because that would be a big mistake.
Don't do that. Absolutely.
Yeah, like I feel like it's a big trip down memory lane, but it's also like a really good investment. Like I would love to have one of those like retro shelf setups where you have every edition of every console ever. Do you have something like that?
So I'm actually, this is getting into adult territory now. So I don't currently have a retro shelf for my consoles, and that's because I'm actually like rebuilding part of my house. So yeah. It's a bit of a grown-up thing. But part of that plan for rebuilding part of my house involves having a retro area, right? So yes. It's in the plan to have everything kind of plugged in and set up and kind of ready to go, so that you can just walk in, and then if you want to play a GameCube game, you can just go ahead and do it. If you want to play, a Neo Geo CD game, you can go and do that too. Like, yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me about all things retro consoles. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I have certainly learnt a lot about retro gaming and consoles as a whole. We look forward to checking out your new retro setup as soon as it's done as well.
Absolutely. I'll definitely send you guys some pics and some videos. It's going to be epic.
Epic. Get it? You did it.
See what I did there?